Good evening, friends, and shalom, and blessings to you all in the name of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Welcome to this episode of Unapologetics. Sorry about that. That's my phone. I am your host, CJ Cox, and this is the show where we are unapologetic about apologetics. We're doing an open room today, not a typical episode. I know I usually don't do open rooms for my own debates, but my crowd doesn't tend to watch Myth Vision. So I figured I'd go ahead and do an open mic here so that we could get continue to have the discussion, keep it going. If there were other people who might, I probably wouldn't. But yeah, and maybe that's a problem, by the way. We should get more people over on Myth Vision as far as watching the debates there, because there is some very awesome debates that are happening over at Dex channel. But I digress. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a debate after show for the debate me and my friend Jonathan Sheffield here just had against Doctors Josh Bowen and Maggie Bryson on Myth Vision. Subject was, did the Exodus happen? And we were taking the affirmative position that it did. And this is also, I didn't expect this, but this is also actually going to be the 700 sub party. We're at 706 now. Thank you guys very much. All glory to God, of course, but you guys have definitely pushed us forward here, so I appreciate you tremendously. If you're new here, by the way, and you haven't subscribed, please do consider doing so if you like the content, and hit that like button as well to help the algorithm here with this video. Share this to get it out to all your different friends, and hit the bell to get notified every time that we go live. I want to briefly cover some channel housekeeping just to say what's coming up here in the future. First thing tomorrow, I am debating on the subject, is Santa Claus satanic? I'm going to be on Modern Day Debate, debating against Alex Stein, otherwise known as Conspiracy Castle. And I do not believe that Santa Claus is satanic. So that'll be an interesting conversation to have there. Also want to let you guys know I have a debate coming up on January the 2nd with Tyler Vella. I'm going to be on Standing for Truth channel debating whether or not the Bible, the first two chapters of the Bible, are actually teaching scientific facts. I believe they are. And that's going to be, I think, also a very interesting conversation. You may notice I skipped over my December 27th debate. That's because it has been rescheduled. Me and Rob Rowe will actually be debating on February the 28th on the gospel truth. Some unforeseen circumstances have made it such that we will be rescheduling that. But that will be on the subject, does the Bible allow for death before the fall? And I'll be taking the position it does not. So I want to go ahead and remind you guys of all of those things there. We do have some other very, very awesome things in the works, but they're just not quite set in stone, and I don't want to get everybody's hopes up. So in a way, I want to get your hopes up, in the sense that, be prepared for awesome stuff. Hit that bell, subscribe. But also, there are certain things I can't announce quite yet, unfortunately. But nonetheless, we'll get to those things eventually. Ladies and gentlemen, link is in the live chat pinned if you want to go ahead and join and give your thoughts. The subject is the Exodus, myth or history. And before we say anything else, Mr. Sheffield and a new fella here, Sam Samuels, thank you both for being here. And what were your guys' thoughts on the conversation?
I enjoyed it, and it was food for thought, and it made for good listening. I tried to contribute, tried to give a few points to discuss in the chat, and I noticed you might have picked up on it, that there are items of discussion that were avoided by the other two debaters that were brought up by you, CJ, which they finally did. The Egyptologists finally did address it, which I wanted, which was what I was hoping for, and it was a bit of pulling teeth with them to finally address the fact that the archaeological cities of Pitom and Ramses were found in Egypt in the Delta, very close to the Hyksos capital of Avaris. And Avaris is the logical location of the land of Goshen, because that's where Joseph and his brothers and Jacob dwelt. They found his home there in Avaris. Archaeologists, they dug it up, they did a report on it. There's plenty of videos on YouTube that people can go look at. And guess what? The Egyptian government felt uneasy. They ordered the place buried as soon as it was dug up. And I wanted that issue addressed, and it was barely addressed. But at the end, she did address the matter. This is what I was hoping to get on point as far as evidence for the Exodus. And another thing, you know what, the issue of the dates and the times, it's very easy to deduce how long the Israelites were in Egypt, because according to our tradition, I'm Jewish, by the way, I'm in Israel, in Haifa, and according to our tradition, the 400 years of dwelling in exile in Egypt actually begins from the moment that Abraham receives the vision from God that this is what would happen to his seed. And also it's like from the time of Isaac, actually, the counting of the 400 years begins. So there are some years where the tribes and the children of Jacob are actually in the land of Canaan, and it's counted as part of the period for the exile in Egypt. And it's not a long period. It's in the areas of about 50 to 60 years. So you kind of like deduct 50 years from the 400, and then once they go down to Egypt and they meet Joseph, their brother, and they have that confrontation with him, and they reconcile to a certain extent. They begin to dwell in Egypt, but they dwell in Egypt not as slaves, but as guests and hosts. No, guests of their host, their brother, the vizier of Egypt, the second in command of Egypt, under the Hyksos rule, which is Joseph. And they found a statue of him there in Avaris. They found the tombs of his brothers there, and he had a special tomb which was pyramid shaped, and they had a statue of him. The statue still exists. They have it of him with his a multicolored coat, a certain hairstyle, a certain skin color. Anyway, you should go see that video on YouTube, evidence of Joseph in Egypt. It's very easy; you can find it. And so the additional period of time that they're dwelling in Egypt as not slaves, but as guests of their brother, and under the rule of the Asiatic Hyksos, the invaders, the non-dynastic Egyptians, a time of usurpation. So they're accepted there with people very similar to themselves. The Hyksos were a combination, they were a conglomeration of different Semitic peoples, Amorites and other types, the Hapiru and all them. It's actually a reference to the Hyksos, not necessarily specifically the Hebrews. All right, so there were a small group of people that entered Egypt when Egypt was a welcoming place to them. It was controlled and ruled by Asiatics like them, Semitic people. All right, so Joseph was in his position as vizier for many decades, approximately another 100 years. All right, so you kind of like can deduct another 100 years. Not that he was alive, but the Hyksos rule that recognized him continued recognizing him and the other the Hebrew tribes as acceptable inhabitants of the land. They didn't want to subjugate them. They were no threat to them. They were one of them. They felt as though they were together, not so different from one another. And the Jews, not that they weren't Jews at the time, the Israelites, the Hebrew tribes, began to assimilate into Egyptian culture. It's written in the book of Exodus that they multiplied and they began, imitating the ways of the Egyptians to the point of idol worship. They actually began becoming Egyptians culturally, and their language and all. They started adopting Egyptian ways, just like the Hyksos themselves. The Hyksos became pharaohs for all things. They adopted the religion of the Egyptians, the dress, the language, all of it. And so assimilation began happening in Egypt. It's the prototype for the first exile, where you find where all the mistakes are made by the Israelites to garner enslavement, to kind of earn the punishment that they received, where they're like they have to go through this misery in order to correct the mistakes they made, in order to know God through the process of the Exodus and the plagues and the Exodus. It's a transformational event.
Well, it
So
is interesting. Um, I appreciate the mention of the 430-year thing, because that's something
no,
I
it's
had
just
actually brought up in the
400.
debate.
Yeah, 400 years. It's according to our tradition in our Hebrew Bible, it's 400 years, and out of the 400 years, it's only 210 years in bondage as indentured servants or slaves of the Pharaoh, and the
Yeah,
timing is perfect. Okay, go
well,
ahead.
it's a
Sorry.
very interesting thing to bring up too, because what it kind of demonstrates, and when you see the Septuagint translation, it actually says Egypt and Canaan. And regardless of if it's right or wrong, I don't argue for the veracity or lack thereof of the Septuagint, because what it demonstrates is that the people at the time understood that to be the case, right? And
Okay.
so what that seems to demonstrate to me is that you have, rather than this understanding that we have in pop history of 400 years in Egypt, you have exactly what you're talking about: 400 years separating Abraham from Moses, and that whole
Yeah.
sojourn period being considered the time in Canaan, but also the
Right.
time in Egypt, right? And that's an important thing to consider, because that lines up perfectly with what we understand
Yes.
from
The timeline. The timeline makes perfect sense because it's not 400 years in bondage. It's the 400 years in total from Abraham to Moses. And it's from the minute that Abraham receives his vision, and it's from the binding of Isaac. From that period, according to our traditions, our sages, that's what they tell us. That's when the count begins. So the 210 years of slavery actually begins from the period that the Hyksos are expelled from Egypt, when the new kingdom begins. That is the logical deduction that it makes the most sense, and it's also it fits because the dynastic Egyptians resented and hated the usurpers. They resented and hated the invaders. They wanted to kick them out. The Asiatics were foreigners, right? They resented them. And so when the time arrived, and this Pharaoh Sennacherib the first and his sons Kamose and Amose the first overwhelmed the Hyksos and managed to defeat them in war, that is the logical point at which a new pharaoh arrived that did not know Joseph. All right, the arrangement that the Hyksos had with the Israelites ended the minute the dynastic Egyptians reconquered Lower Egypt or the Delta. Okay, they did not like these foreigners. All right, so for whatever reason, the children of Israel did not leave with the Hyksos. They remained where they were. I think they took their chances, very much like the Jews of America are taking their chances with America today. They became very comfortable with where they are. All right, they refused to leave. They thought maybe they could find some accommodation with the new kingdom pharaohs, the ones that did not know them and did not know Joseph and had no arrangements or accommodation for them. These are the original dynastic Egyptians that do not like the Asiatics. All right, they resent them as foreigners and as invaders. They have a grudge. They bear a grudge against them. So you could see why there's a motive for having the Israelites that stayed behind, and there were other Hyksos that stayed behind. They are actually considered the mixed multitudes because they were a mix of different ethnicities and types, and that came from all around the Near East. Egypt was a place of plenty. It wasn't just the Semitics that came there. There were probably other people as well, like the Philistines or the Sea Peoples, who knows, Greeks or other people it could have been plenty of different types. They were always
it's a metropolitan area, right? I mean, cosmopolitan area rather. So you've got like tons and tons and tons of people.
Yeah, and that's the mixed. Those are the mixed multitudes. Okay, so basically, from that point, when you have the reign of Senanechre, his two sons, Kamose and Amose, you can begin counting down 210 years. All right, when you count down 210 years from the beginning of the new kingdom to the point where the 210 years end, you arrive at the reign of Akhenaten, Amenhotep IV. Okay, the guy that changed his name from Amenhotep IV to Akhenaten. Okay, and he revolutionized Egypt 5 years into his reign. It wasn't immediately when he took power, when he took control over Egypt. And I want to read a little something about him so that we can understand, get a little reference about who this guy was and what he did. Okay, here. I'm reading from a American Research Center in Egypt. Okay, it's an Egyptological site on the net. Okay, in the long course of Egyptian history, few figures have been as polarizing as Akhenaten. The period surrounding this Egyptian king's reign was characterized by social, political, and religious upheaval, the likes of which few cultures ever experienced. In just 2 decades on the throne, Akhenaten imposed new aspects of Egyptian religion, overhauled its royal artistic style, moved Egypt's capital to a previously unoccupied site, implemented a new form of architecture, and attempted to obliterate the names and images of some of Egypt's traditional gods. It is in part due to the tumultuous nature of Akhenaten's tenure that this era in Egyptian history, known as the Amarna period, has received so much attention from scholars and the public. Okay, let's see. Okay, then it goes into his biography and all the things he did. But something traumatic happened to this pharaoh. And I refute the argument that he was trying to win power from the priest class, and it had nothing to do with the fact that he underwent some kind of traumatic event. I mean, what compelled him to all of a sudden want to be a monotheist and worship only one God, the Son? You know, there are passages from Exodus that kind of make sense. They fit with the whole argument and the proposition. Exodus chapter 14, verse 5 through 29. If you'll allow me, I'll read a little bit of it. Okay. Pharaoh received a report that the Israelites had escaped. When he heard this, he and his officials changed their minds about what they had done. Pharaoh said, "Why did we let the Israelites leave? Why did we let them run away? Now we have lost our slaves." So Pharaoh prepared his chariot and took his men with him. He took 600 of his best men and all of his chariots. There was an officer in each chariot. The Israelites were leaving with their arms raised in victory, but the Lord caused Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, to become brave, and Pharaoh chased the Israelites. The Egyptian army had many horse soldiers and chariots. They chased the Israelites and caught up to them while they were camped near the Red Sea at Pi Hachirot, east of Baal Zephon. When the Israelites saw Pharaoh and his army coming toward them, they were very frightened and cried to the Lord for help. They said to Moses, "Why did you bring us out of Egypt? Did you bring us out here in the desert to die? We could have died peacefully in Egypt. There were plenty of graves in Egypt. We told you this would happen. In Egypt, we said, please don't bother us. Let us stay and serve the Egyptians. It would have been better for us to stay and be slaves than to come out here and die in the desert." But Moses answered, "Do not be afraid. Do not run away. Stand where you are and watch the Lord save you today." These are modern translations of the old English that people are used to in the KJV or other translations that you'll find. This is more like modern language. "You will never see these Egyptians again. You will not have to do anything but stay calm. The Lord will do the fighting for you." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Why are you still crying to me? Tell the Israelites to start moving. Raise the walking stick in your hand over the Red Sea, and the sea will split. Then the people can go across on dry land. I have made the Egyptians brave, so they will chase you. But I will show you that I am more powerful than Pharaoh and all of his horses and chariots. Then Egypt will know that I am the Lord." Okay, but then I'm just going to the episode where Pharaoh is finally humbled. when they drowned in the sea. The Egyptians were running as fast as they could from the water, but the Lord swept them away with the sea. The water returned to its normal level and covered the chariots and horse soldiers. Pharaoh's army had been chasing the Israelites, but the army was destroyed. None of them survived. But the Israelites crossed the sea and on dry land. The water was like a wall on their right and on their left. But the Pharaoh survived. The Pharaoh of the Exodus lives. And I'm not referencing Cecil B. DeMille's 10 Commandments. Okay, Cecil B. DeMille's 10 Commandments went off of Hebraic, a commentary. He went off of Josephus, and he went off of the Bible itself, the 5 books of Moses. It is said that the Pharaoh of the Exodus did not drown in the sea; that he was actually saved in order to bear witness to what was done to him and to his army, and to report it back to his people in Egypt. And according to the Mishnah, the commentaries on the 5 books of Moses, the Pharaoh went back and reported what had happened. He brought his court or his magistrates or people under him to bear witness. He brought them to the shores of the Red Sea to show them that his entire army had drowned. And there were remnants of his army on the shore, dead bodies and the horses and chariots. In order for them to believe what he had to tell them, that when he arrived and told them what had happened, they didn't believe him. They said he's crazy, he's lost his mind. But he actually showed them evidence of it, proof of it. And at this point, this Pharaoh undergoes a major psychological, transition. I think he's permanently altered, permanently changed. All right, it's not that he understood that there's the one God of the universe and the Creator. He translated that into the main God in the Egyptian pantheon, which his father was also a cultist of. His father had actually begun the process of putting the Aten, the Egyptian sun god, as the main focus of their pantheon. But he decided after that experience, I'm coming to this conclusion as just basically as a matter of deduction. I mean, he underwent a traumatic event, and according to him, he comes back. He realizes there's only one God. He puts the sun god as the one God, the creator God. And obviously he's not going to give up his position as a pharaoh, as an intermediary between him. He serves as an intermediary between his subjects, his people, and this God. Okay, this is how you get actually the Pope. It's actually.
See, it is an interesting position. I would say I wouldn't be quite as. And this is just for me personally.
Yeah.
I'm not quite as confident in putting a name to it as far as Akhenaten being like the Pharaoh of the Exodus. What I would say is I think there's definitely, you're on the right track as far as, and I don't mean that you're on the wrong track and anything else. That's not what I'm saying. But I simply mean to say that I agree in that Akhenaten, it seems to me to be not coincidental at all. That he lines up so perfectly with the biblical chronology. And even if he was like the son of the Egyptian pharaoh potentially, or a grandson, or whatever it happens to be, he seems to have direct knowledge of this monotheistic deity, and he seems to want to reverence it in some way. And I would argue, just as you are now, that seems to be evidence of him understanding something happened to Egypt, because I mean that's just such a radical idea.
No. I think he was actually the one. He was not just a witness or a bystander. He was the actual pharaoh of the Exodus, because he had a brother who happened to mysteriously have died in his youth, and this was his older brother was called Thutmose. All right, so and it fits. Moses escapes. It's not again. People always get it into their minds. Episodes from the movie The 10 Commandments, Cecil B. DeMille, Yul Brynner, and Charlton Heston. It's not that Yul Brynner is standing there on the edges of the Egyptian empire, on the borders there, banishing Moses, and like that dramatic scene. According to the Torah, according to the Exodus, it's that Moses flees. Moses leaves. You know, he's not banished. He's not expelled. He's not exiled or whatever. You know, he kills the Egyptian slave master, and then he flees. He runs. He runs away. It's not. It's totally a different, telling of the actual true events according to what's written in our Bible, and not the
Yeah, and it's
this.
funny. Ironically enough, the most historically accurate Exodus movie I've seen so far is actually DreamWorks' Prince of Egypt. It's still got flaws, but it's better than
Right.
Cecil D. DeMille's by a mile.
I mean, Cecil B. DeMille in the 50s was doing like a soap opera or like a romantic drama. You know, he was making it all saucy and kind of like a steamy love affair. It's like, and people watch that movie on Passover and they get all excited about, oh, they're going to watch the movie about Moses and the Exodus. It's a freaking love story that he's it's more of a bawdy a 50s love drama kind of thing going on over there. It's not as historically accurate as people realize. So they get that's created a lot of misconceptions, and that people have that in their heads as a part of popular culture, and they don't get it out of their heads if when they try to do serious research on evidence for the real story, for the real event that had happened. So Akhenaten had an older brother that mysteriously died in his youth. All right. And again, you heard our Egyptologist from the previous debate saying that the Egyptians would make up as many stories as possible to kind of like smooth over or kind of like conceal the real story and just like sweep it under the rug. You know what I'm saying? Or make it go away. Not tell the full truth. Why would they embarrass themselves? Why, so they would, alter their history. And then the thing is, those two debaters that you were, arguing against, they want to go off of what has been found in Egyptian records in Amarna or on the walls of the temples of Egypt, the hieroglyphs, and evidence from the Egyptians themselves. And they see that as the only concrete, acceptable form of proving or disproving what had happened. They don't want to go into the depths of the abstract or making assumptions. And for whatever reason, you heard I forgot the woman's name. She was saying, I don't really care if there was a Moses or not. It doesn't affect me or my faith. And the other guy also said it really doesn't matter to them. So they don't have anything really invested in that being a real event or not. I, as a Jew living in Israel, believing in my history and the faith of my people, going back to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, and all the other characters or personalities or persons in the Bible. I do have a vested interest in not allowing skeptics and minimalists, crap all over my faith. All right.
Yeah, and let me piggyback kind of off that too, because that's one thing that I think is very interesting. That a lot of people, and I obviously whatever she wants to do is her prerogative. I'm not trying to in any way be insulting, but what I am saying is I have always found it interesting. There's a reason I define myself as a fundamentalist, and that is because obviously, that the addition of the New Testament in my faith here, but the idea is still quite clear. There's like these are historical events. This book means what it says and says what it means. And even, it was interesting when I was making the point with these, with my first points, it appears that they were, and maybe they were ignored because there wasn't time or because we got to other things or because they just didn't find them relevant. But I felt that the evidence I provided in my opening statement wasn't actually even addressed, right? And it's very important things to look at. Like, for example, when we say the Exodus, one evidence for the Exodus occurring is the fact that the Bible says it occurs. A lot of people will say, well, the Bible says isn't an argument. And it's like, well, hang on. Let's put on our skeptic cap for a minute. Let's forget our faith and just for a moment, put on the skeptic cap. What are we actually saying? we're saying that this document is a very, very, very old collection of multiple independent sources which function as a history for a certain people. And it bears witness to us that this event actually took place. If we're just looking at it at that, we haven't added the presupposition of faith yet, which I do have. But if we're just looking at it from that perspective, that is evidence, right? And it's very good evidence, in fact. And it's evidence just as saying, Herodotus's histories is evidence of Thermopylae. It's evidence just as saying that Josephus's, Roman Jewish wars are evidence of that exact thing, right? And so on and so forth. And so I think that it's important when we start to look at things from that kind of perspective. The other thing I brought up was the argument from tradition, right? The 4th of July, it doesn't prove that Independence Day happened, but it is evidence that Independence Day happened, right? There's this holiday that people are celebrating every year to commemorate some event in history.
Right.
Well, the Passover is the same thing. There's a holiday every year that Jews celebrate. The dates all the way back, as far back as we can take Israel history, right? And it's commemorating a certain event. Now, if you're going to tell me that event didn't happen, then why is this holiday in existence? You know what I mean?
Well, there's archaeological evidence for it too in Yeb.
Yeah, exactly.
There's proof for it in northern Saudi Arabia, in the land of Midian, Jebel Allah, as it's called by the Bedouins of Saudi Arabia, of Arabia. And the evidence is strewn all over the place over there.
Yeah, but Yeb is an actual account that we have written from 600 BCE of giving instructions how to do the Passover without the lamb because they didn't want to insult the other Egyptian temples in Yeb.
Right.
It's exactly what it is. It's a halachic instruction how to do the Passover without a lamb. Exactly.
Yeah, and I just want to point out, with respect to my interlocutors, because it was a very good conversation, but they never even approached my argument from Scripture or my argument from tradition. They didn't bring up what I said about the Levitical priesthood. They didn't bring up what I said.
Well, you made a good argument as far as that they didn't address this as well. I like the fact that you said that recent discoveries over the modern era, throughout the modern era, have actually sealed shut all of the claims of fables and make believe and myth in regards to the kingdom of David. Tell me the name of that stealing. Tel Dan stealing.
You have Dr. Adam Zartal that found Joshua's altar and found and he wasn't looking for it. He's an atheist from the University of Haifa that I'm from Haifa. They kicked him out after he found Joshua's altar because he was looking on. They were all looking for it on the wrong side of the mountain. But if you look in Scripture, it never says on what side of the mountain it is, and it actually makes sense that it's on the.
In Shiloh, in Shiloh, right? In Shiloh.
They found Shiloh, and you see, Israel Finkelstein, the one they love bringing him up.
Yeah.
He disagrees with the actual archaeologists that dug up the 3 gates at Hatzor and I forgot the other 3 gates from Solomon, that he tries to say that they're not from the time of Solomon, but the archaeologists that dug him, he insists that they all are from the time of Solomon.
Well, not too long ago.
I'm not even saying that these things necessarily demonstrate that I'm right or even we're right, because we're all in agreement here.
No, but there's one major factor.
Pieces of evidence, and it seems like people just don't want to address them. Like once you start talking about ancient documents in the Jewish tradition or just the Jewish tradition itself, it's like people's eyes just glaze over, and it's like, well, hang on. If I was talking about the Greeks, you would take this very seriously, but since we're talking about the Israelites, all of a sudden this doesn't work as evidence.
Or even Native American oral traditions, or Aboriginals oral traditions, you would take it seriously. If it was any tribe 100%. In Africa oral tradition, you would take it seriously. But if it's Jewish oral tradition, it's dismissed because it's anti-Semitic. That's what it is.
Well, no, it's not that they're not. They don't want to be. They're not being anti-Semitic, but they're dismissing it because
it is when you
Yeah,
when you accept
yeah.
everyone else's oral traditions but not the Jewish one, is because of anti-Semitism, because it's
Well,
influence
Well, I
even
think
on
it's more
atheists that come from a Christian.
anti-Jehovism, if I'm being honest.
no, they
I
had
think, and
that.
I think even anti-Semitism probably is primarily based in hatred for the Jewish God, if I'm being
Yeah,
honest.
but they have a vested interest in minimizing the Hebrew scripture and minimizing what they call, I'm sorry, the Old Testament. It's a bit of Christian bias against the Jews throughout the centuries. You can call it anti-Semitic, but it's more of like a personal interest that's been passed down throughout the centuries of minimizing Judaism and minimizing the history of the Jews in Israel. Why? I'm sorry. I mean, this kind of can irritate certain people, but it's part of the tradition of Christianity to say we are the successors. The Jews have lost out. We are the ones replacing them. So their history is insignificant to us. And in fact, if you want to prove their history, you'll have to make sure to cast doubt about
Well, there does
Moses.
have to be a caveat there, though. I freely acknowledging what you're saying for sure, because I actually talk quite frequently on this channel about early Christian anti-Semitism, because it's everywhere in the early centuries for certain. So I certainly understand where you're coming from. It is important to note, though, that that's not originally the case, right? All of the original Christians were Jewish people, ethnically speaking, right? So
Well,
in other words, they would have
would
been.
beg to differ now with new archaeological evidence. They find these temples in Galilee or even by the Dead Sea that shows that Roman soldiers were part of the first early Christians.
Yeah. The cross was a symbol of the first century.
Soldiers certainly did become Christians, right? But all of the earliest, like as far as James and Paul and the disciples,
we don't know who.
Well,
Jesus himself, like these are all ethnic Israelites, right?
We can agree to disagree. Wait. Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt and be a nuisance, but we can agree to disagree. But we're getting off topic. You know, I'd still like to focus on the Exodus. There's a certain things like that you said. I want to compliment you. I forget the list of subjects and points of history that you said not too long ago. Minimalists used to say that this is complete fantasy. This was made up, and just recent discoveries have proven otherwise. There's proof from the first temple. There are artifacts from the first temple that are absolutely bona fide evidence of the first temple, where that existed, and you have minimalists saying that the Temple of Solomon never existed. It's a myth. All right. So the point you made,
the Hittites, right? They used to say the Hittites didn't even exist, right? And then 1906, we actually dug them up, and it was like, hey, no, this is not only do they exist, but this is like a massive empire that we just didn't have any idea of.
Exactly. Yeah. All right. Okay, you can go on about what you want to go on talking about.
Is there anybody that doesn't recognize the corruption of the Waqf and the complete lies, and is there anybody that really takes that seriously? The idea that I mean, I really don't know. It seems like they would be laughed out of the court.
No, but there was an earthquake like 100 years ago, and they found they were doing refurbishing there, and they found like beams of wood that were these wooden beams that were for sure from the first temple and some from the second temple. So there's pictures of it. So there's archaeological evidence.
No, but from all their illegal digging that they did unauthorized and that they dumped in the valley of next to the temple, the Temple Mount over there. That's where they found coins and artifacts from the first temple period, not too long ago.
Yeah, they found the bull of Natan Eved HaMelech.
Yeah, there you go.
But that they found not in the pile. They found that actually on the site by Melchizedek's temple.
Really? Well, there you go. It's all over the place. Well, and like you said,
David's palace.
There you go. Well, like you said, CJ, evidence has been provided, and these people are dead silent. And they continue on with their approach that once one thing has been proven to actually exist, where they said it never existed, they just, Well, let's they'll take it back as far as possible and say, well, that didn't exist and that couldn't have happened and this and da. All right. Well, how seriously can we take these people? We realize that they have a vested interest in casting doubt. All right.
Bible
So
criticism is a religion, not a science.
there you go. I agree.
Hey, real quick, just because we got some new additions. Kelby and Kevin, shalom, thank you very much for being here. How's it going?
Hey, brother CJ. Who in here is giving brother CJ a hard time, huh? Who do I got to beat up?
It's not about that here.
Actually, as far as I know, I don't know if Israel is also Jewish, but I know Mr. Sam.
Oh, you can be guaranteed he's Jewish. How you can't hear that? You can't hear that. You don't have the Jewish nose. You can't smell out another Jew. How sad is that? You heard him talking. Come on.
I was waiting for you guys to start haggling with each other.
Well, the point just being, though, as far as this debate was concerned, we were actually all on the same side because
we're on the same page here.
Opposition did the Exodus happen, right? So
yeah,
we do have some differences here, but not as it pertains to this topic.
Well, I would say that Hamosh the first. I think there's a good chance he was Moses, according to oral traditions. That we know that he was a king of Egypt until around the age of 40, and that his tomb was found with a mummy that is not him, and that he was probably not related to his father. So that way, the change of the name of the dynasty also changes when
it's too early. No, it's too early. It's too early.
If you say that they were only 210 years in slavery.
Yeah, when it began from Israel. It began from the rule of Amos. It begins from the rule of Amos.
You're miscalculating because he leaves for 40 years. So his son takes place, right? That's the 40 years that he disappears. He comes back when he's 80. So that's another 40 years after his rule. Or what you'll see according to Moses, there'll be another 45 years later until the Exodus.
No, well, Moses leaves Egypt in his youth, and not as a middle-aged man.
No, as 40 years old. That's exactly what it says.
No, Moses leaves in his youth. He's not a 40-year-old man.
No, 40 years old.
Well, no, I think the book of Exodus actually says 40 years old.
Black on white. He leaves at 40, and he comes back after 40 years when he's 80. That's black on white.
Well, find the quotes for me. He leaves when he's a younger man.
Like what? Exodus 3-4 or something. When does he leave? Around Exodus, and also killing the Egyptian.
I don't mean to rude and cut you off, but your microphone is really really low, man. I'm like having a hard time hearing you.
Mine?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm on the phone. I'm sorry. But I would say his
I'm looking at it now.
A lot of the pieces fit for Amos the first.
No, actually, it doesn't because it doesn't fit in with the Hyksos. It doesn't fit in with the Hyksos.
He defeats the Hyksos.
Yes, yeah.
So listen for a second. When he says that he hit the Egyptian, that is like that's putting it in like as if he hit one person, but that's him hitting the Hyksos.
No.
Well,
wrong.
Wrong.
Well, the enslavement of the Hebrews begins.
For sure, I'm saying this is a possibility.
It's okay. It's a theory. I'm telling you, the Hyksos were the ones. No, I'm saying the Hyksos were the ones who actually hosted the Hebrews in Egypt. All right, they were not sort of hostile towards the Hebrews, towards the Israelites. They were Asiatics, just like they were what became the mixed multitudes, the Erev Rav. All right, the Hyksos, the leftovers of the Hyksos that remain in Egypt, are the mixed multitudes. They are the Erev Rav. Those are the ones that come out of Egypt with the Israelites. All right.
Rabbi Ori Shirky disagrees with you. Okay.
All right, whatever. We can agree to disagree. The time periods, the timelines, and the chronology makes perfect sense. From the period of the Hyksos, count down 210 years. You arrive to Akhenaten in the middle part of the New Kingdom. All right, and this is the Pharaoh that undergoes some, mystical change of heart about, believing in one God.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah, the dating could you could. That's the thing. When you talk about the dating of the Exodus, also people need to get on page before they try to look for evidence, especially when you're talking to Egyptologists.
So,
Yeah, well, they'll
Anthropology is
come
a
up with all
topic.
sorts of theories about Akhenaten having nothing to do with the Exodus story or with having been affected by what? No, he's not too late. He's perfect in his time. All right. According to what's written, the revelation at Sinai occurs in the period of around 1313 or 1330, in the area of around surrounding the Akhenaten's reign. Okay, according to the count in the Hebrew calendar, and this I've heard many times over, the revelation at Sinai occurs sometime in the 14th, 13th century, like somewhere in the area of 1313 to 1330, somewhere in that area. It's perfect as far as the chronology for Akhenaten.
I think he was a proto-Muhammad, and that he taught a corrupted version of the one God.
No, well, yeah, well, he had an experience that traumatized him. He didn't know the God of Israel. He realized that there's a one God because of the claims of Moses and the plagues and everything. He comes back to Egypt, and he's not going to surrender his position and become all of a sudden an ascetic Hebrew rabbi, believer in the holy name. He's going to go back. And because of this change of heart he has, he goes and overturns all of Egypt and wants to make it monotheistic. He changes the location of their capital city. He changes everything around because the man has become disturbed. He's been affected. He's been traumatized.
Yeah, it's very much like Muhammad starting that's monotheism amongst the Arabs later on. Like I see a lot of similarity.
Yeah, and the thing that's really interesting about it to me is that I wouldn't necessarily come to the exact same conclusion as Sam, as far as I think that Akhenaten was probably very closely descendant of the Pharaoh of the Exodus. But regardless, what I think one of the main points that I think Sam is getting at here that we definitely know to be the case, I think, is this man Akhenaten had some kind of. There was something about that period that
he had a life-altering experience. Yeah, I mean, it's a life-altering experience. A pharaoh of Egypt doesn't all of a sudden decide to one day, wake up and change everything because of his personal interests. Want to, to marginalize the priest class or the priesthood. That makes sense for people that are skeptics and minimalists that don't want to recognize that there's something there hidden underneath the surface that they don't want to recognize because it could be evidence. All right. And on top of that, they don't want to recognize
the fact that it's so close, because that's the other thing too, is like the fact that it's, if we're talking the 15th or 14th century as far as when the Exodus happened, that's also when Akhenaten reigned. So it's like, I don't think it's possible that can be a coincidence, that he's that close to the event independently, and also we have this taking place, right? So even if whether he's the Pharaoh of the Exodus or the son of the Pharaoh of the Exodus, or regardless of what he actually is, as far as that's concerned, I think it's obvious he was absolutely impacted by the Exodus in a way which was truly traumatic to him.
We have the letters written to that guy. It seems to me, just in overall, that's likely that he's like a generation after the Exodus. He's around the time of Joshua, because we have letters written to him talking about the Haparu that are raiding the place and taking everything over. And to me, that fits a timeline very well.
Could be. But I found the
you have to just take 480 years from Solomon's temple being built, and then you get to the date of the Exodus.
And that would be?
I don't know. I don't have access right now to internet besides through this.
Well, the kingdom of David and his son later, Solomon, is in the Iron Age, right? It's somewhere in the area of 950, 960 BCE. All right.
950. Moses is either argued between 1450.
No, David and Solomon.
Oh yeah, Solomon reigned 1000, and then David was 950. If just in general, is my recollection.
All right. So add I don't think it's in exactly 480 years.
That's what it
It's
says, 480.
well, according to the Mishnah, what I read recently is that the countdown to the dwelling in Egypt actually begins from the binding of Isaac. All right, that's when the real period.
That'll be 410 years. Yeah, but so from the time that the tribes go down, you're talking 210 years.
There you go. So somewhere in the area, the math over there.
So that's what I'm saying. It fits more. I don't have it in front of me, but I think that fits more to Tamosh the first.
Not Amos. It's not. No. It doesn't make sense historically because those are dynastic Egyptians that expel the Asiatics. Okay, the Semitic peoples. Okay, and Avaris.
Closer. I don't have it in front of me, but I think
Israel. Listen, Israel. Listen, Avaris, where the capital of the Hyksos is, where you find the home of Joseph. They found it. Okay, and they buried it. They found it and they buried it. He was a vizier. He was
hundreds of years earlier than the Hyksos.
No, it wasn't. Wrong.
Jacob and Pharaoh, where they talk about that people that are shepherds are considered an abomination amongst our people, and it seems like there'd be some connection with Hyksos and that in the time of the latter years of.
You have to look at the timelines and the chronology. It's Joseph is in the time of the Hyksos.
Turned on the descendants of Joseph, right? And they are the ones that enslaved the Israelites.
No, wrong. Wrong.
Had something against shepherd people.
No, they were themselves, what do you call them? Marauders. They were themselves invaders. They were Asiatic peoples. They were Semitic. These are not the people that turn. Yeah, and guess who sits second?
Just listen to Rabbi Uri Shirki on his explanation to Genesis and Exodus and on the channel.
It doesn't make sense. Dynastic.
The problem here is there's two chronologies that we actually tend to have.
Wait. No. The dynastic Egyptians were racists. They hated the Nubians, the blacks, and they hated the Asiatics. They hated the Asiatics.
Just one moment. Yeah. Just one moment, because I want to clarify something here, because there's a lot of things that I think could help to unmuddy the waters here a little bit, because there's kind of truth going all around, but I think talking past a little. So the first thing is, it is definitely true. The once you get past, especially the 18th dynasty, there's a change in Egyptian history when it comes to being. I mean, we're talking like Nazi-esque racists. Like, these guys were bad, right? They sometimes up to and including that systematic slaughter of ethnic minorities. They really, really did not like non-Egyptians.
Of course.
And so that starts with about, I think it's Kamos, but it could be Akhmose. I can't remember which.
Yes. Those are the ones. Kamose and Akhmose. They were the racists. They were the ethnic purists. They could not have been Hebrews. They could not have been Moses.
Right, because Moses was brought up in the house of Pharaoh. He wasn't.
No. But they were dynastic Egyptians. All right,
he was.
and Moses.
That it exactly makes sense. Exactly, he didn't know his brothers. He was part of the Pharaoh. He was the Pharaoh.
Well, there's a couple things there, because it could make sense, but we'd have to define some things, right? Because it could be possible that, given the Hyksos were recently expelled by a group of people who were incredibly ethnically supremacist, it could be that is the catalyst they used to enslave and slaughter the Hebrew people, which therefore does get you Moses in the house of Pharaoh. But that would mean that Akhmose was the Pharaoh who slaughtered the innocents, not that he was Moses himself, right? I don't think he can be Moses himself, because the slaughter of the innocents occurs much later after the wait a minute, no. Well, no, it's somewhere in the area of where. Look, you have to look at the time of the revelation of Sinai according to the Hebrew tradition, the Jewish tradition. It's in the 14th century, in the period of around 1313, according to our calculations, the Hebrew Jewish calculations, 1313 to 1330. Or tell me when revelation at Sinai was according to Hebrew Jewish traditions.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask.
If I may, where our difference here would lie, Sam, is that it's not a difference in the biblical chronology, because I think we interpret the biblical chronology the same. The difference is the traditional Jewish chronology was calculated, I believe, sometime in the first or second period, around the same time as the Cedar, or first or second century AD, around the same time as the Cedar Olam. And it appears, according to modern archaeological evidence, that while the internal chronology was consistent, they got the a couple of the dates wrong. And so if we do, it specifically as it pertains to the ultimate conquest of Jerusalem, and if we factor those in, which gets us a conquest of Jerusalem in about 586 BC, then that pushes the Exodus back using that same internal chronology to about the 1450s BC.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's around 1450 is according to the Jewish traditions, what I know.
Yeah, because it's not that the Jewish tradition calendar is wrong. It's just simply that one little hinge date of when did the Babylonians
I just go from the
Jerusalem,
Temple of
right?
Solomon 480 years back, just like it says in the scriptures.
And you'll probably notice if you look at the traditional Jewish chronology, I think it says that the temple was destroyed in like 410 BC. But we know historically that was a miscalculation, right?
What, the Babylonian conquest is somewhere in the 600s?
Yeah, exactly.
That's like 500. That's 580 something BCE.
Exactly, and see that's what I'm saying. So it's the Jewish chronology is accurate. It's just that they got the specific date. And let me give you an example of how this can be important, right? Let's say we had a perfectly accurate chronology of America, meaning that we had all of the dates right. So like, hey, in the 89th year of America's existence, for example, President Ulysses S. Grant was just recently leaving or something like that, right? Like we have all of that stuff internally accurate, but now we're trying to synchronize that with another calendar, and we got the date wrong as far as the synchronization is concerned. So we said that
I think it's pretty clear when the Babylonian conquest was.
Exactly, and so what you're saying, Sam, is accurate in that the Jewish traditional chronology is consistent, and I think we need to study it because it's true.
I don't think
the
Sam
only
is
problem is that I think we need to account for the fact that they miscalculated their synchronization with the Babylonian calendar, and we have to push that date back a little bit to 580, as you already said, right? Because
I'm just going according to what makes logical sense. Okay, what you have
with Akhenaten, but I think Akhenaten is the outcome of the Exodus, but he came like he's the dynasty, a couple dynasties down, but if you
do you know the tradition that the Pharaoh survives, right? He goes back and reports to his court that what had happened. Okay?
He becomes the king of Nineveh,
and he also brings witnesses to show them that what he says actually did occur. All right, and what does it say?
According to
wait. What does it say? Wait. What does it say? The Pharaoh does tshuva. He does repentance. He recognizes that there's only one God.
He doesn't go back to Egypt. He goes to rule in Nineveh. But those are more like mythology. But I would say, but according to the oral traditions, Moses was a king of Egypt, but he ruled like the whole Mesopotamia. Like so, it fits with what we know of Tamosh, the first, that he like ruled Canaan and ruled up into Syria and all that. And then he disappears when he's like 35. They found his grave. They did DNA testing and they realized that it's not him actually. And actually, and the head is decapitated, so it makes sense that maybe it's the person that he killed that they put in his tomb, and that's part of the Egyptian.
It's too early. It's not close enough to the documented time of the revelation at Sinai. Do the math and tell me. Find me the
6 years earlier. 47.
No, I think it's hundreds of. It's like a couple hundred years. It's from that's the period of the enslavement. That's when it begins. The revelation of Sinai is in the area of 1313, 1330. No, that's what I've read. That's what I was told. That's what according to Jewish calculations.
Just go 480 years back from the building.
All right. Well, you have to do the research. We'll do the research. I'm not certain of.
It's around 1450. That's what I know.
It doesn't.
Just because I want to, because this has been a really fun talk, but I just want to really quickly lay out some of the evidences that I had provided so that we can get onto the topic of the debate, right? Because I do want criticism as far as what I had provided here in the debate. And I think it'd be interesting to get everybody's
Well, the Sea of
account.
Reeds,
So,
that's dried up.
well, so the first thing that I had brought up was what I called the
Yeah,
academic
earthquake.
retreat, which was this idea that you have all these academics who reach a consensus on a certain issue, and the consensus is X biblical fact is wrong. And it's the Hittites didn't exist, or Nineveh wasn't a real city, or King
Right.
David didn't actually rule, right?
Those were good points. You made excellent points. Yeah.
And I think that's a really important thing for us to note, right? Because what ends up happening in all these situations is we find archaeological evidence that demonstrates these groups existed, or these people existed, or the city existed, or whatever it happens to be, right? And then without skipping a beat, the academics just move on to the next biblical fact that isn't definitively proven yet. And it's like that you guys aren't even acknowledging the fact that this document was just demonstrated to have historical veracity. It's at least, at bare minimum, an accurate representation of the Israelite history, even if you don't assume the divine claims. And I think that that's a really important thing. Now, I will note, Dr. Josh did kind of flip that around on me a little bit and say, well, we do have a lot of scholars who are doing, from the Christian perspective and the Jewish perspective as well, unfortunately, the same thing. And while I said I acknowledge that, I did tell him, you got to understand, that's not me. And that's not those of us who are taking the scripture seriously, right? We're not retreating. We believe what it says and think that it says what it meant.
Yeah, well, it also seems like they're not very well versed in, like the Egyptologist lady. She didn't even understand what parts of Canaan were conquered or not. So she's not even in the game. And
the suit and tie
He's
guy.
also not very well versed in the Hebrew scriptures.
What was his name? Dr. Josh, the suit and tie guy?
Yeah, Dr. Josh Bowen, and the woman is Dr. Maggie Bryson.
Maggie and Josh. Okay, Dr. Josh, the suit and tie, kind of lost his cool and went off into a profanity laden rant against you because I don't know what something got him heated, and he's the guy who was reading off all of the skeptical minimalist points of fact that he calls points of fact, and he wanted to deflect from the fact that, the regions of Canaan that were controlled by the Egyptians, like the Maggie said, the land of Canaan was a vassal. They were to the Egyptians. Okay, they were vassals, the city-states of the Canaanites along the coast.
That's not a fact. That's only according to Egypt records, which they're fabricated. They like to boast about their.
Yeah, they like to boast.
Actually have.
Right.
That's one of the things I tried to press. Right, is like we know that the Judean highlands were very much a disputed area. Right, the Hittites
The
had
Egyptians
some
had
control sometimes.
no
Canaanites
foothold
had some
there,
control sometimes.
Yeah.
There was independent city-states sometimes. The Israelites were there sometimes. The Egyptians were
And
there.
and Dr. Josh got all hot under the collar when you started saying that. That couldn't be. That's impossible. Because there you see the bias. There you realize the bias, and then he goes and uses the argument of academic credentials and all the invested time, and I should give credence to that because they did.
Guys, it was nice talking to you. I just have to go. Hopefully I'll get to speak to you guys.
Oh yeah, certainly. Have a good rest of your day, man. I
Yeah,
appreciate
right.
you stopping by.
All right.
Take care.
Bye. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, and it was interesting. The only thing that they seemed to take serious issue with, which was just Dr. Josh did not like my PhD idolatry comment. Does not seem. It seemed that definitely got under his skin a lot, and perhaps he took it as a personal dig. Maybe he's I don't know if he's like friends with Adon Dershowitz or something like that. But I don't know why that was such a dig.
No. This is the way hierarchy and snobs, intellectual or pseudo intellectual snobs, try to silence any opposition. They say, well, we're more studied than you. We've invested more time and in learning this, the details, the facts, the specifics, and they want to intimidate you when this information is readily available on the internet. You don't have to be a professor in some Ivy League college to access this information and draw your own conclusions if you know something about the Bible, the Hebrew Bible in its original language in Hebrew. All right, so that's if you want to go head to head on all these, what are your credentials and what are you worth? What kind of understanding? What level of perception and do you have? Do you speak Hebrew? Do you read Hebrew?
I am learning Hebrew. I'm not quite.
No, I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to Mr. Josh, the suit and tie guy. All right, I'm addressing this point to him. He was trying to intimidate you and put you down by saying, "Well, you're not, you don't have the academic, background or I'm looking for another good word to use here. The authority. You don't have the authority. Whatever. Yeah. But and they do that also on Derek's channel, and with other guests that he has, they go back and forth with certain authors. Well, they say, well, he's not a Bible scholar. He doesn't have the intellectual credentials, the bona fides. That's the word I was looking for, the bona fides. And so I find that to be a very patronizing way of dealing with a person you're debating, because you don't have to be an Ivy League professor to make your points and get points across.
I just want to point out too, I think that it is, the kind of points that I was using are points that you might not actually see from an Ivy League professor, because unfortunately they have this serious bias against the idea of using tradition, and I just think it's so unwarranted. I mean, I gave tons of examples, but I already gave the examples from the Bible itself. But let's give the equivalence of that, right? Like in other places. We mentioned I mentioned the Independence Day. Independence Day is evidence that the Declaration of Independence was signed at some point, right? I mentioned the day of New Year's. The day of New Year's, well, it's not like they just decided, hey, well, this is the beginning of the new year arbitrarily, right? What's the reason for it? Well, that was the day that the consulship in Rome would begin, right? The consulship was the executive leader in Rome that would be elected every single year to a one-year term, and that term would begin on what we now consider to be January the 1st, or the calendar of January, which is where we derive our word calendar. So we have the question. Well, the Hebrew calendar, according to the Torah, begins in the month Aviv or Nisan, whatever you want to call it. The point is
Nisan,
Nisan, right?
In spring, yeah.
Exactly.
That's when I was born. I was actually given my Hebrew name because I was born during Passover. My name in Hebrew actually means freedom, liberation in Hebrew. It's Dror. That's my Hebrew name. I go by Samuel because that's my family name, and Americans mangle the pronunciation of my Hebrew name, so I make it easy for them and I tell them to call me Sam. But my Hebrew name is Dror, which actually means freedom and liberation, because I was born during Passover. But because that event is so far in the past, it seems to be buried in the past to such an extent that they can cast doubt on it very easily, and they can try to minimize it as much as possible by saying
that's really why I like to stress these traditions, because it's like if you and I try to stress the comparisons too, because it's, and I know you agree with this. I'm just clarifying for the point of the audience. What we need to understand is, if you're saying that these kinds of things aren't evidence for an exodus, right? Then you have to start using that consistently. We have to now start saying that there is no logical implication one can get from the fact that there is a January calendar, and there's no logical implication one can get from an Independence Day. There's no logical implication one can get from the power of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, right? And I think that those are absolutely logical implications. The Julio-Claudian dynasty does not just have power over Rome because something caused them to have that power. Well, in that case, it's the Augustinian civil wars, right? But the point is that if you were now to come up and claim, hey, the Augustinian Civil War didn't actually happen, those civil wars didn't actually happen. Okay, well, from whence does this power derive, right? And
you know why they're so
people to not ignore that, because it's a very serious question.
But at the same time, the reason why there's so much resistance to the story of the Exodus is because there are a lot of supernatural events there that demand a person actually believe that there's a creator and that he's directly involved, and there's an intervention, and that's very difficult for people that don't want to recognize that there's a God of the universe, a creator. The story of the Exodus it seems so far-fetched to them because it demands a belief in supernatural power that does intervene, that supersedes the laws of nature. All right, and that's what gets under their skin. That's what really bothers them. All right, that's the reason why, relative to other events that you stated that are recorded events in history, that there's no argument about their validity, is different from stories that seem to them so fantastical, and so supernatural. It's just too far fetched for them. That could not have happened. It's just ridiculous. All right, and I'm sure that the people in the time of the Exodus, when they heard it, the report from the Pharaoh, said the same damn thing to the Pharaoh until he took them, dragged them to the shores of the Red Sea and gave them evidence and showed them what had happened. His whole army had drowned. All right, now that's a matter of faith and belief as well. All right, that statement that I'm making now, that's what the Pharaoh did, I believe that's what happened. And as far as Israel making these claims, I wish he came back. The Reed Sea dried up. I know where he's getting at. The guy's a little affected. It wasn't a little lake. It wasn't a little freaking swamp that dried up on the border between Sinai and the Gaza Strip somewhere. All right, it was a sea, It is the Red Sea. It's actually I could tell you the exact spot where it happened. It's I actually visited there in the 70s with my parents when it was still under the control of Israel. The whole entire Sinai Peninsula was in Israel's hands, and there was a tradition, even from the Bedouins going there when I was a child. I was like 5, 6 years old. I remember this, and they told me this. The tour guides. This is where the crossing of the Red Sea occurred. It's Nueba. There's a little inlet, not inlet, like it juts out. You can see it on the map. If you see the map of Sinai, there's a plain there that juts out into the Red Sea. I don't know if it's the proper geographical or topography to call it an inlet. I don't know the exact word to use, but it juts out into the Red Sea. It's a plain. It's surrounded by the mountains. All right, and there's a vadi. There's a little stream that flows out into this plain, and it's surrounded by mountains, and it's very constricted. And it's the perfect topographical area for the pursuit of the Egyptians, and where the tribes, the children of Israel, are trapped with the sea to their back and the mountains surrounding them. It's not some freaking swamp. It's not some freaking sea of reeds that dries up and all these retarded theories. I think he was like ultra orthodox. This guy.
Well, the thing that I think has always been disappointing about those theories too is because the Hebrew does say Yom Suf instead of Yom Adan, and I do get that. But the thing is, the Yom Suf is what we today call the Red Sea, right? So It's like, okay, you can say that they called it the Sea of Reeds that back then. That's fine. The Sea of Reeds back then is the Red Sea today. It's like saying, no, it's not the Pacific Ocean. It's the Western Sea, and you're in Spain. And you're like, okay, well, what's the Western Sea from the Spanish perspective? Oh, the Pacific Ocean. That's crazy, right? And, people, I don't know. That's one that I've often noticed when it comes to these kinds of facts. And the other thing with it too is if people don't find arguments from tradition convincing, which I absolutely think they are, but if people don't find arguments from tradition convincing, we also went over some of the details that I find convincing from archaeology. Like, for example, people don't tend to talk about this much, but there are actually records like Brooklyn Papyrus 35, 1446, for example.
Okay.
It literally is. It's a slave list, right? It's got 95 slaves listed on it that some Egyptian noble has. 33 of the 95 names are Semitic, and in those Semitic names include, but are not limited to, Asherah, which is the female version of Asher, Yaakobah,
Okay.
which is the female version of Jacob, Dawid, which of course is David.
Yeah.
There is, I believe, Puah there, Puah, right? The
Okay.
Egyptian midwife, or excuse me, the midwife in Exodus, and all of those. So literally, what we have here is a list of explicitly Hebrew slaves, and you'll never guess where this list was found. Well, it was found in the area of Goshen. You know
Oh,
what I mean? And it's like, so this
there
is
you
like
go.
bona fide evidence that,
Yeah.
and nobody disputes this evidence, by the way. This is something that you could go to fringe scholars and consensus scholars alike. They'll acknowledge, yeah, Brooklyn Papyrus 351446 absolutely lists Hebrew slaves in Goshen. And then they're not there anymore. They're in Israel. So it's like, okay, so what caused them to go from point A to point C? I would argue it's event B, namely the Exodus, right? Because that's what the history tells us. The other example, they started talking about the conquest. And interestingly enough, 4 of the 5 cities which Dr. Josh mentioned, I actually would argue there's a very convincing case to be made that those cities have very good evidence for conquest. For example, he mentioned Jericho. And he says,
Yeah.
well, Jericho is this small little village.
Right.
And I think
Right.
that's irrelevant because it doesn't really,
Well, it wasn't a
Go ahead.
small village. It wasn't a small village.
Exactly.
He
It's
was.
got these massive walls surrounding it, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
it's a military checkpoint that is very vital for the Canaanites' trade.
Yeah.
And when they destroyed it, it was a very clear sign of power, because we also have to remember, if we read the book of Joshua, one of Joshua's concerns, because he's a brilliant military commander, one of Joshua's concerns was psychological warfare, right? He wanted
Okay.
the
Yeah.
Canaanite
The
people
trumpets.
to fear him, so that way they would leave without a fight, right? Because part of his intention was to get a lot of them to leave so that he wouldn't actually have to put them all to the sword, right? You see this all throughout
Okay.
Deuteronomy and the book of Joshua and all that. And when they first initially lose at Ai, he even says, oh, what's going to happen when word gets out that we don't have the psychological edge that we did, right? He doesn't say it exactly
Okay.
like that, but he talks about the fear will be gone and all that kind of stuff.
Okay.
So what taking Jericho out did, since it's in the display of everybody else, right, is it went right off the bat at the beginning of this war. We're displaying our power and letting everybody know, hey, you got a choice: leave or this fate will befall you. And it's actually a really brilliant military maneuver there, right? Here's the thing, though. Brilliance aside, historical record in the Bible aside, we actually have direct evidence that Jericho was conquered at the time specified in the manner specified. There's been 4 famous excavations at Jericho, though there's been many others. 4 big excavations at Jericho. The first one being a German excavation that people tend not to reference anymore, but it came to the conclusion that the evidence was consistent with Joshua. Then there was the famous Garstang investigation, which also came to the conclusion, that this was perfectly consistent with the biblical evidence. They said that if they looked at Jericho, there was evidence of people dwelling in the walls, like Rahab is said to do. There was evidence of mass fire, right? Destruction by fire. There was evidence of iconoclasm, which, for those who don't know, is the destruction of religious artifacts, which would make sense in a holy war. All these other different things that would indicate an attack here. So then you had Kathleen Kenyon come. She's the third now. 2 have already concluded it's consistent. The third comes up. The third just so happens to be an activist for atheism. I'm not saying that means she has to be wrong. I'm just saying if she comes to a conclusion that's different than everybody else, and she happens to have a bias that may lead her to that conclusion, that's worthy of note, right? And she comes to the conclusion first that it doesn't line up, because if you take a late Ramesside date of the Exodus, it's 150 years before that. Then it's pointed out to her that Garstang and the original German excavation actually don't take the Ramesside date. Rather, they take a date that is what we would now today call the early date, sometime in the 15th or 14th century, right?
Okay.
And then she changes her tune and says, oh, no, I meant it's actually 150 years before that, and made up this hypothetical conquest of Jericho that we still have no historical evidence of, being an Egyptian conquest from 1550 BC. There's no evidence that it happened. It just didn't exist. And then there's a fourth major excavation there done by Bryant Wood, and it comes to the exact same conclusion as the other four, and also find some new evidence like pottery that is specifically from that time period, and things like garments and wheat and stuff like that were burned rather than looted or taken. The point just kind of being that you have these major excavations, right? 3 out of the 4 of them reach the conclusion, and only one of them is a Christian fundamentalist, by the way. So the first 2 do not actually have religious bias. 3 out of the 4 of them come to the conclusion that this is perfectly consistent with the Hebrew histories. And one, which has very active bias against this particular idea, right, says it's not that way, and has to change their story in order to keep it consistent, because originally she actually fell into the trap of falling exactly in line with the Hebrew traditions. I find that to be amazing, personally. And then you can move on from that, right? Because there's others. Hatzor. Hatzor has, not only do we have evidence of Hatzor being conquered by Joshua.
I was there. And also Megiddo. I live not too far away from Megiddo. I live like a 30-minute drive from Megiddo.
That's actually really cool. That's like really, really cool, actually.
Yeah. So.
But yeah, in Hatzor, we not only have evidence of the Hatzor conquest, we also have evidence of the second Hatzor conquest from the Book of Judges. You know what I mean? It's like that's one of the best cities in the world as far as looking for evidence of the biblical story and the Hebrew histories. And then you have, again, the city of Lachish. You have the city of Ai, although there's dispute about Ai. I think that there is good evidence to suggest that I can't remember the name of it. Kirbat Jabbar, I think. I can't remember the name. But anyways, Bryant Wood's Ai is the actual Ai.
Well, you know what? I have something in Hebrew that might interest some people. I can refute Israel's claims that he had this rabbi state that Moses was 40 years old and was a pharaoh at the time, which is total nonsense. I'm reading here from Wikipedia in Hebrew. I'll just read it for you in Hebrew, and then I'll tell you exactly what it means. When Moses struck down the Egyptian, it doesn't translate to he struck down the Hyksos, or that's a far stretch what Israel was reaching for. Here, the background. Moshe שהבין שדבר הריגתו את המצרי התגלה ברבים. When Moses realized that the fact that he struck down and killed the Egyptian was made known to the populace, the general public over there, חשש שמה יגיע הדבר, חשש שיגיע הדבר לאוזני פרעה. He suspected, he feared that the news would reach the ears of the Pharaoh. Okay, so he was not the Pharaoh at the time. He was not a co-Pharaoh. He was not in the seat of power at the time. Okay, when he struck down the Egyptian, and he wasn't in his middle years of like 40 or something like that. He was younger. ואכן דבר הריגת המצרי מגיע לידיעת פרעה שאף מבקש להרוג את משה. So the news does reach the Pharaoh, and the Pharaoh declares that Moses should be put to death for it. Okay, so this is not a Pharaoh. Moses is not a Pharaoh when he does this. All right, it's totally completely negated the claims that Israel was making. He was flying off the handle completely. Al pi Chazal, according to the Jewish sages, Chazal. Okay, so now this is the authority here. If I was debating Israel, if he was still here, going back and forth. Al pi Chazal, Moshe אכן נתפס ונלקח להריגה. According to the sages, Moses was actually caught and was taken to be executed. But at the time of his execution, a miracle occurs. Okay? And when his neck was turned as hard as marble. Okay? והחרב המנופת על צווארו אינה מזיקה לו. When the sword was laid down on his throat, on his neck, it didn't harm him. Okay. Immediately after the failed execution, Moses escapes and runs to the land of Midian. And the land of Midian is 100% identified as northwestern Arabia. It's not in the Sinai Peninsula. It is northwestern Arabia. The area where you find Nabatea and south of Nabatea, that area where you find I was in that area in Petra. South of there is the land of Midian. The area of Nabatea is actually Paran. Do you know Dan Gibson? Have you heard of Dan Gibson?
I do. Yeah.
CJ? Okay. So Dan Gibson, and he's a Christian missionary evangelical type that tries to convert the Muslims to Christianity. I don't take issue with that. That's fine. I don't care. He could do. I like his research. I like his videos because it actually casts a lot of doubt about the beginnings of Islam. The Sacred City documentary and a lot of the research he's done on geographical locations actually make perfect sense. The Mount Seir and Paran and Nabatea, Petra is called by the Greeks and the Romans. That's all where Islam begins, the original Mecca. And the Muslims take issue with that. They get really offended by that. But the land of Midian is northwestern Arabia. That's where you find the real Mount Sinai. All right, that's where Moses fled to.
Did you say Petra is the original Mecca, you're saying?
Petra Petra, according to Dan Gibson and the research he did, is the original holy gathering, sacred gathering place of the pre-Islamic Bedouins.
Let me say really quick too. It's we obviously would have to change subjects, so we won't go too deep into this, but. Yeah. The evidence is almost undeniable that for the first 150 years of Islamic history, they prayed in the direction of Petra and not in the direction of Mecca. In fact, Mecca might not have even existed at that time.
Well, it
went right in their temples or whatever.
It went by a different name. It went by the name of the Valley of Becca, because of the earthquakes that used to devastate that place. The Valley of Tears, the Valley of Weeping. And it makes perfect sense that the holy temple was a pagan temple where they had the Kaaba, the meteor. It was the temple of Dushara, and it's actually written black and white in the Quran, temple of Dushara. How can they dismiss this? It's written there in their Quran, temple of Dushara. There is no temple of Dushara in the Mecca that you have in Arabia now. There is a temple of Dushara in Petra. And the whole entire description of the outlay of the city and the temple and the cave of Hira and the well of Zamzam, all these specific points on the map, they all fit Petra. They don't fit where Mecca sits today. And I highly recommend his documentary. It's very intriguing. Yeah, I don't agree with him. Obviously, we don't have to get into this on our disagreements and where we don't see eye to eye. I'm not for converting Muslims to Christianity, but I like his research. I like the work he did because it sheds light on Islam as being actually what do you call it? It's a palace intrigue because it has a lot to do with the wars that the Parthians were fighting against the Byzantines over the Holy Land at the time. So the Muslims are actually in some ways hired hands. They were like hired guns. They were mercenaries. Before they were Islamic, before the rise of Islam, the Nabateans, the Bedouins of Arabia, were hired by the Byzantines because of the plagues that had savaged the Byzantine Empire, Byzantium at the time. They were short on manpower, so they actually hired the Bedouins pre-Islam to serve as mercenaries in their outposts. And it's a long story, but there's a lot of intrigue to be discovered on the rise of Islam and Muhammad, and who actually tutored him, and why there are a lot of tinges of Christianity within Islam, and they believe in Jesus and Mary in a different way, and that they take issue with the Christian Bible, and there's a long list of things to discuss, but we don't want to get off topic. But anyway, Dan Gibson is a good researcher. He was very committed to the work he did, and I take him seriously. So the land of Midian is northwestern Arabia, by all accounts, even by the people that live there.
By the way, let's just note that was well known in the around the turn of the century, in the Second Temple period, right? Like if you read whether it's the New Testament with Paul and Stephen, or the Talmud, or the works of Josephus, or it doesn't matter, right? Every source that comes from that era, they're unanimous that Arabia is the Sinai Desert, not the Sinai Peninsula.
Exactly. Yes. It changes around the time of Helena, the mother of Constantine, Empress Helena, that she just arrives as a pilgrim and starts, just making up all sorts of garbage. Nilly willy. She goes to the Sinai Peninsula and says, "That's Mount Sinai." And that's problematic. But anyway, maybe that was God's purpose, that the real Mount Sinai should be hidden from sight, or hidden from the public for as long as it has been.
Well, and I think it's certainly, and obviously slightly different perspectives, obviously, right, because of our ultimately different conclusions here. But I personally have always thought it's very interesting that God got rid of all the things that people could make an idol out of, right? Like the Ark of the Covenant is no longer found. Right. Moses' staff is no longer found. Mount Sinai is obscured. I think he did it on purpose to make sure that we weren't committing idolatry, personally.
Oh yeah, and the one positive aspect of the Bedouins in the area of the real Mount Sinai is that they're very sort of like pious about stopping idolatry, and they were like self-appointed guardians of the real Mount Sinai, Jabal el-Lawz. They were very protective. They were very Islamic fundamentalists. We don't find it over there. It's there, Jabal el-Lawz. There it is. That's it right there. It's in a nature reserve. It was fenced off by the Saudi military, and only recently they opened the area up to foreign tourists. And for some reason, I don't know, they want tourism now, and they planned on building a mega city over there, by the name of Neom. A futuristic mega city. For some reason,
I talk about that on my other channel. I have a political and news-oriented channel as well, and I talk a lot about Neom, actually.
Okay, there you go. So it's not. It's not far away from Nuweiba. You see on the east, on the Sinai Peninsula, on their eastern coast, right there, Nuweiba, right in the middle. You see that inlet that jets out. That's where the Red Sea crossing occurred. All right. So anyway, and it's a sea. It's not some frickin' swamp, and it's not some frickin' lake that dried up. All right, whatever nonsense theory some people have, they need to get that out of their heads. It was a supernatural event. It was a very grand and grandiose event so people have a real problem accepting that, because it reveals the hand of God. It's like the hand of God revealed, an incident where God intervenes directly in a super grandiose way. It's very dramatic. They take issue with that. It's too much for them. So they want to dismiss it or discount it, or claim it's all fantasy. And just like you said, all the other things that they claimed were fantasy have been recently, there was light that was shed on all of those claims, and now it's accepted fact that The first temple did exist. Solomon's temple was real. Okay, there's mention of the house of David, the Tel Dan stele, and there's other things, plenty of other things that are being discovered from day to day. Well, they might have said that Hezekiah, the accounts of Hezekiah were probably all made up, but then they found the tunnel of Hezekiah, the water tunnels in the city of David. And they found the what do you call that? When you it's in the British Museum. When you dedicate there was a dedication in Proto Hebrew. When they finished the tunnel, when they met up, they chiseled a dedication plaque at the point where they finished the tunnel of Hezekiah. It's found in the British Museum. And it's Proto Hebrew, and the king's name appears there, and what Israel said, the boule, where you on a letter or on a clay tablet where you have the seal of the king, that's been found, Hezekiah's seal, and it has Egyptian symbols on it. So Egyptian culture was influencing the Israelites at the time, and I'm sure it was influencing the Israelites during the time of David. And a lot of the Psalms of David are influenced from Egyptian writings. It doesn't mean that he plagiarized it. It means that the Egyptian culture was like the popular culture. It had influence.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. So anyway, I want
to think too, and I even said it in the debate. I am 100% confident that there will come a time in the very near future, provided the Lord tarries, that we will know that the academics will no longer even entertain the idea that Moses didn't exist, or entertain the idea that an Exodus didn't happen, just as they have with Nineveh's existence and David's existence and Hezekiah's existence. Like, it will happen. And when it does, they're going to move on to a different set of biblical facts that they can deny without skipping a beat. And we're just going to have to keep doing this until the end of the age. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, well, they'll take it back to the flood, and they'll say there was no flood. But, you have a character that went by the name of Ron Wyatt that went to Mount Ararat, and people still go there to this very day, and you can find the ark over there. It's been what do you call ossified? It's been turned into, it's fossilized. It's been fossilized over thousands of years. So I don't know if you believe in that, but you can see the documentaries, and that's very compelling as well.
Yeah,
you want to take it back that far? I mean, it goes back 6,000 years. The flood, the antediluvian or the pre-diluvian. What is that? That's around 5,000 years. That's long. That's much longer.
That can't be accepted. That's impossible for mainstream to accept, even whether it's true or not. I find it to be convincing, but they just cannot believe that, because that throws the whole. I mean, if it's a worldwide flood and the boat was that big and whatever, the whole system goes down the tubes essentially, or you're a laughing stock.
What I'll say, just as far as this issue is concerned too, is because right now we're here and not there, and so what I'll say is this: I'm hoping to maybe be part of the popularization of these arguments that I think, because there is, and Mr. Sheffield brought up some of the good arguments too, as far as the argument from, if you're approaching from the argument from the ancient histories, you got an Exodus. If you're taking an argument from the Jewish histories, namely the Bible, you got an Exodus. If you're taking an argument from the traditions, you got an Exodus. If you're taking an argument from archaeology, you got an Exodus, right? And I think the more we keep hammering home on those points and just be willing to grant certain things, right? Like when people want to bring up the population thing, I don't even try to defend it, because here's the thing. If we can't agree that the event happened, how am I going to convince you the details of the event happened? That doesn't make any sense, right? So let's just say, fine, let's say it was exaggerated, like Thermopylae. Did the event happen, yes or no? And eventually, I think I have confidence we will get to a point where even the most rabid of atheists concedes, yeah, no, it definitely did happen. And then at that point, we will move on to those other details, right? Okay, how big was the event? Was Moses a prophet? Was there these plagues? That other kind of thing, right? And I think the evidence will demonstrate that those are probably true as well.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It's all the jawboning about how do we get to these conclusions, and trying to run around it and play all these word games, and you realize there's an agenda there. It's not just a bias. There's a personal agenda. Like you said, it's a religion of denial. It's not just an academic pursuit. And because of previous examples that you stated, it makes me personally, as a Jew, a believing Jew, feel like these are my opponents. These are people I really have to tackle. I have to oppose them. I can't let them just simply come around and cast doubt in the minds of other Jews, or my child or my son. God forbid. I'm gonna challenge them. I'm gonna battle them. I'm gonna do everything to disprove them. Because atheism, in my opinion, for whoever is out there that wants to be an atheist, God help you, good luck to you. But it's the reason. It's a big reason why the world has been turned upside down to the point where culture today in the Western world is just absolutely despicable and absolutely just rotten, completely rotten. I mean. Yeah, anyway, I'll stop there. I'll let Israel make some points. He came back.
Yes. Well, I forgot I wanted to say something, but I had some. I was talking about the 10th plague of the death of the firstborn. So actually, if you look at the recent volcanoes and stuff like that, or there was in Africa some gas came off a lake that turned red and killed like the whole town nearby.
Okay.
And
yeah, there are a lot of things happening now.
It's a low traveling gas, and
yeah, it kills people in their sleep. Yeah, and if it happens in their sleep, just
no, but it's a low traveling. And if you look at ancient Egypt, everyone slept on the roof except for the firstborn that slept inside the house down.
Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. There are all sorts of explanations, but if you want to go on a different tack, and I'll pose a challenge to people. I mean, we're living through a very a sort of disturbing time period. If we are all in agreement with that, I mean, this is not a normal time we're living in. Am I wrong to assume that? Am I in agreement with you guys? Or do you think that we're going through?
I would definitely agree. In fact, that's a big portion of why I talk the politics I talk, is because I think that we are in a world where, I mean, really, it's kind of an interesting thing, because I think we have more strangeness, if you will, today than any other time. Like, we're in such a unique era in history that it's unfathomable. Like, the idea that I'm literally having a conversation with a person in Israel. Like, that is like what, 15,000 miles away or something like that. Like, that is insane. But it's
the prophecy that the end of time knowledge will cover the earth from sea to sea.
And if we turned on. Yeah. And if we turned on our cameras, we would be able to talk to each other face to face. That's like Star Trek, that's Star Trek right there for you. Yeah, I mean, exactly. In the 80s,
even the idea, like, and this is one that I don't think people often think about, right? But like the idea that we may have the profession our fathers had, but we don't have to, right? Back in the day, your dad did the same thing that his dad did, the same thing that his dad did, the same thing that his dad did, and so on and so forth for 1,000 years back. I mean, there were literally families that for 5-6 generations worked on the same exact plot of land. You know what I mean? And then here we have in the modern day, you can do almost anything. You want to be a football star, do that. You want to be a polymath expert in multiple fields, do that. You want to be a rap star, do that. You want to be an architect, do that. You know what I mean? And you can do so as a poor person or a rich person. You can do so regardless of the ethnicity you have. We live in an era where you can go down to the supermarket and just buy food. But then there's the flip side of that too, right? There's also extreme disinformation, extreme laziness, a lack of tradition.
Right.
You know, and it really is interesting. I think we live in the most unique era of human history.
A lot of the playing ground has been leveled to a certain extent as far as information and access to information, and this has been a major part of why humanity has been so held down, repressed. It's been the oligarchs. It's been the the elites, the upper classes, the royals, whatever aristocrats. When they had a monopoly on information, they managed to control the minds of the masses to such a degree that they can't do it today. They cannot do it, and that's what scares them. That scares them to death.
Mr. Samuels, are you a Jewish Christian, or are you?
No. I'm not a Messianic Jew, and I'm not a believer in Jesus. No, I'm a Mizrahi, Middle Eastern Jew. My parents are from both India and Iraq, Baghdad, and Bombay. And I grew up in New York, in Brooklyn, and I was introduced to plenty of missionaries and evangelicals, and I had a 3-year period in the U.S. military where I was stationed in Nuremberg, Germany. I was in Oklahoma and Texas. I'm familiar with Americans and Christian Americans and Jews for Jesus types and missionary work and all that, and I respectfully disagree with those people. I'm very open to discussions and. Whatever,
Not to really get
mm.
into it, but
Yeah.
one question I always wanted to ask somebody, like an actual Jewish guy in Israel.
Yeah. Right.
The entire concept of, just in general, overall historically, the fact that most of the world, as far as we understand it, knows in some way or fashion the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Yeah, by way of both Christianity and Islam.
Your belief in Jews don't really proselytize. So
no, we don't.
Your belief is that that's kind of something that should not have happened. Everybody.
No, absolutely, it should have happened. That's according to Jewish tradition.
Well,
And Israel can back me up. No, Israel can back me up here. The proliferation of the Torah in the forms of both Christianity and Islam through their variations and their takes on it, helped spread the Abrahamic faith in different forms that were more, the Europeans had their take on it. The Bedouins, the Arabs had their take on it, but it proliferated, it spread, it was meant to.
Well, if you don't think that Jesus was Messiah, but we do, and then that's how we believe that we know God.
Okay.
So in your view, though, that would be a false Messiah, but yet you're saying that good still comes out of us believing a false Messiah.
No, there's good in the world having been exposed to the Hebrew Bible, all right, because they know the stories, they know what's expected. They changed their perspective on it by reinterpreting it and transliterating it and adding to it and making all sorts of alterations to it to suit their agendas, in order to not have the Jews be the ruling class over them. This is what happened in the time of the Romans, the Greeks and the Romans. They didn't like the Hebrew Bible. There was actually it's like Jewish supremacism there. That's what actually bothers them. So they have to usurp and undermine and subvert and also subsume. So they call our Bible old, and they call their Bible new. All right, and this is where we get into a debate. It can get into a headbutting match, but I don't want to go there, honestly.
Yeah, I think you and I would possibly argue with the same types of Christians that you're referring to there, as far as the ones that kind of see Old Testament. Well, that's the Jewish Old Testament God,
right?
The other God we've replaced Israel.
Exactly.
CJ is agreeing there that that replacement theology is one of the banes of human history and religious history, basically, and that's that's a fundamental difference between I think a lot of false.
Yeah, well, we paid for that with our blood for 2,000 years, 2 millennia, and the blood libels against the Jews that you find in the New Testament, I don't take kindly to that. I saw Mel Gibson's something, was it The Passion of the Christ in Midtown Manhattan when it came out in theaters. I was curious, I wanted to see what the big hullabaloo was all about, and people were having religious experiences in the theater.
Well, you're not going to find anybody, I think, defending Catholicism here. But when you say,
the interesting thing is too, and this is where we do, and we obviously we can't get too much into it just because it would distract from the topic at hand. But there is a lot of historical context that I think certainly needs to be added. Like, for example, there's a lot of people say that his blood is on our hands phrase in the New Testament is the New Testament authors trying to put some kind of a as you actually said, blood libel on the Jews. The interesting thing about that is if you look at Christian history, they didn't actually understand it that way because of Luke 23:34, which says, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." That was understood to be not washing the Romans of guilt, but actually washing the Jews of guilt. In other words, it was meant to be a response to the hasty sort of idea of let's put the blood on our hands. And so what anti-Semites in the 2nd and 3rd century did is they actually removed Luke 23:34 in order to try and make the Bible say that the Jews had a blood libel, because if they thought that if you took it all in context, it actually argued against the idea of.
You had what's his name? Marcion. Marcion was the character. The Marcionites.
Yeah, and Marcion's another one too, right? He edited the New Testament to try and make it sound. And you see the same thing happen with the Old Testament in slavery, right? They used the Torah to try and say that the American style of slavery was accurate, but then if you read the Torah they actually gave to the American slave, it's like super doctored, right? And they take out all the parts that say you need to treat the foreigner well and the slave needs to be treated like a hired worker and all this other kind of stuff. And it's a common tactic, I think, when people have like an agenda that they want to try and like submit.
The word for slave in the Hebrew doesn't really actually mean, it means work.
Well,
Evid, Evid.
Say, right? When you find these people who really want to control a certain group of people, right? Very commonly what they'll do here is they'll actually doctor the text, right, to try and make it say what they want it to say, because if you just take it at its face value, it doesn't actually say that. And I'd posit for you as a piece of evidence for that, the most pro-Zionist and pro-Jewish people on the planet are Christian fundamentalists. I think the reason for that isn't because Christian fundamentalism is somehow morally superior or anything like that. I think what it is that the Bible, if taken at face value, is very clearly very pro-Jewish. And I think that the idea that, and in fact, you even hear Paul, right? Paul the Apostle says that Gentiles are grafted in. People don't actually, take into account what that actually means. When you graft a tree branch into into a tree, right? You're literally taking the tree branch and artificially creating a organic bond between the root and the branch there, so that it becomes part of that original root. The root is first, though, right?
Okay. We'll have our disagreements from the Jewish traditional Orthodox perspective versus the Christian take on it, as according to the New Testament. But I don't pretend to be ungrateful to American Christians and evangelicals and fundamentalists. I'm not going to spit in the well from which Israel has been drinking out of ever since its foundation. But at the same time, certain Americans that I ran into, I can call myself an American to a degree, American, Israeli, whatever. Some Americans that have too much of this bluster and ego, say that, well, Israel would not have cannot exist without the United States, and Israel would not have been created if it were not for the United States, and they totally discount the fact that tens of thousands of Jews shed their blood and gave their lives in order to found this state, and they totally dismiss that and say it's only by virtue of the United States that Israel exists. Now, I don't take kindly to that. I think that's very arrogant, and I've been treated to that kind of treatment. I've been given that kind of spiel by American Christians, and it gets to the point where it annoys me. It really it bothers me. And having relatives that died in Israel's wars, it's not by virtue of the United States that Israel has been reestablished. It's by virtue of the Creator that Israel has been reestablished, as was written in the prophets. It was fulfilled, and it was a big reason why a lot of Christian evangelicals and believers in America got all excited in the late 40s. Once Israel
historically, I don't think America was involved in helping Israel until the 60s, and that was only when they found the benefit to fight the Soviets to be involved.
Exactly. Yeah, they didn't like the fact that they didn't like the fact that Israel was established by socialists and quasi-communists and atheists.
With rabbis who have said that it's not by the Creator that Israel exists. They've literally told me that it's by the IDF.
There's a difference of understanding that, because there is a lot of Haredi and Orthodox Jews who agree with that sentiment, Kelby. There is also, though, a group, they're called Hardal, and they are ultra-Orthodox Jews, which are typically known as Haredi Jews, who actually support the idea. They typically derive from their thought from guys like Rabbi Meir Kahana and Rabbi Yehuda Kook, and Abraham Kook as well.
I would say it's more than that. They were part of the founding Zionist movement, the religious Zionist movement. So people dismiss the religious Zionist movement that was huge.
Exactly, and that's what I'm trying to say. When you have guys like Kahana and the Kooks and these other guys, and not the Kooks, that is literally their last name. I'm not saying that they were Kooks.
It's more like Cook, like a cook, not Kook. All right, whatever. You can pronounce it how you like.
And that would be better, right? Because that makes it sound less.
And you have Jabotinsky. Jabotinsky was not an atheist, and he was not a socialist. He was more,
But I would just say, as dispassionately as possible, that anti-Semitism at its root is purely satanic. I don't know if you believe that there's an actual Satan. But what I believe is the true Christian belief is that Satan knowing that Messiah is going to come out of the Jewish people, and knowing it since the garden, when he heard that the seed would crush the head, Satan has always known that he was going to come from them, and he's followed them through history, through Abraham, through the nations, through the word, through the prophet. He is taught all of the nations how to hate the Jews. And anti-Semitism in general is a spiritual affliction, and I see Christians that are in it, and a lot of it is from the smallest crack of doctrine that may have started back in the earliest times and has just risen through the cracks.
Well, it could sound a bit like ethnocentric, kind of like how people today accuse the Jews of being, supremacists, like, and all that jive.
It's never made sense to me. Well, growing up, I grew up in
it was meant to be. It was meant to be this way. There's plenty of reasons.
My mother, she's like, "Oh, don't Jew those people." And as growing up, I never understood. I went to school and I'd be like, "Okay, they play with dreidels. What's the difference?" I don't understand. Like as an innocent child, and then I yelled at my mother recently, like because she was like, "Oh, those Jews," and I'm like, "Wait, what about like?" And it's like, what is the? When you specifically ask people, everything that they accuse. Well, they're
I can find it in the prophets. I forget which prophet.
Fulfillment. And then the fact that the Jewish people, even back when I was a stark raving pagan, I still recognize Jewish people. Like, they're the only people that have been around this long and have survived. Now, back then, I was so blinded. I was like, well, I guess that's by chance, right? They're just so stubborn that they're still around, as opposed to like my Celtic ancestors or the Babylonians and the freaking Sumerians. Like, these one people just happen to stay around. And now, looking at it through the eyes of what I believe is the Holy Spirit, it seems just so abundantly clear that the Lord has kept his promise.
Yeah, but at the same time, all the torments and all the suffering and all the misery that the Jewish people have had to experience throughout all their exiles, it's written in the prophets that the world would gossip about you. The world would always focus on you and talk about you and relentlessly, and they would not relent. They would not, stop until the end of days and the arrival of the Mashiach. And that's been the case. It was a small group of people, a very minute percentage of the world population, and we've been getting flack for centuries, talking, and gossiping and accusing and blaming and persecuting. It's like there's something very peculiar in that itself. The fact that the Jews have been such a pain in the ass to so many people, that they've had to constantly bitch about them and talk about them.
Well, that's because the Kabbalists own most of the world. They own most of the corporations. It's apostate Judaism.
Well, you could say that, and I could say the same about the royals of Europe not being Jewish and being.
Every time the Jews are exiled or something terrible happened to them, it's because they refuse to listen and repent to the Lord.
No, they were too influential on the masses that were illiterate, and they were showing them certain things in history in their own Bible, which got under the skin of the royals and the priests and the popes, that the Jews became a threat and a danger to their power. And so,
Satanism, whether it's Kabbalah, which came from one particular spoke in the wheel of Satanism or paganism, or
listen. The Christian take on Satan is not the Jewish take on Satan. I have a fellow Jew in here that's a believer, that's very educated.
Satan is biblical. You have an unbiblical view, sir.
Listen, buddy. Hey, don't get into a shouting match with me, guy. I'm not here to argue Jesus with you. Okay, I'm avoiding the Jesus issue. Get off of the Jesus issue, okay? The Jesus issue. Great, good for him. I want Israel in the debate here on Satan, the Jewish take on Satan versus the Christian take on Satan.
Well, listen, modern Judaism is different than Judaism of old, because ancient Jews would disagree with
I don't need you to teach me the history of my people and the history of my religion, friend. All right? I don't agree with you on Jesus. Get off the subject. Don't preach to me. When you start preaching down to me, you've got issues, my friend. Do not preach down to me. Listen, do not. I don't care to hear it. I've heard it from you people in America long enough. That's why I'm not there. I don't want to hear about Jesus from you, buddy.
Jesus is real. Why don't you want to hear?
No, Jesus is an invention of the Greco-Romans. Okay, he's fake. I'm sorry.
Subject, my idea is that Satan is the reason that these things become hidden from.
Yes.
Also,
you see Satan. Well, you people see Satan as an opponent to the Creator. The Creator doesn't have.
God knows you would do this. God knows this. Because the reason that he allows these things to become hidden again is just like CJ says, they would eventually become idolized.
Let's keep it friendly, guys.
Just don't start preaching down to me and patronizing me. That's where you get under my skin. I don't need to hear it from you people in that manner. Avoid that.
No offense, but this is a Christian channel. If we want to talk about,
all right. Well, I came in here to discuss the Exodus. I didn't come here to be proselytized.
Guys. Just real quick, I understand, the obviously passionate conversations, but we can't be talking over each other just because we won't get in, the conversation won't get anywhere. So just try to let everybody articulate their point before we respond. I know I'm obviously guilty of that sometimes too, but it's just whenever it gets too passionate, talking over each other can become something we can't do. So I appreciate you guys and continue forward with what you're saying.
Sure.
All right, well, the Jewish take on Satan from the beginning of the faith itself is far different from the Christian take on Satan.
That's
All
not
right?
true.
Yes, it is. It's not the same. Satan is paganized and Greco-Romanized and Hellenized in the time of the founding of Christianity. It takes on a different concept altogether. All right? Satan is the opponent, okay, of man, not the opponent of God, okay? Satan is still a servant of God. He's not a fallen angel, all right, according to the Jewish tradition. You people take a different tack on Satan. We don't believe.
Chapter and verse for that belief, sir.
Yeah, I'm not going to get into that with you. You can look that up on Tovia Singer's site and reference his teachings on that. All right. Yeah. Whatever. Listen. I'm not going to get into this debate with you. Judaism is different. Judaism is different from Christianity.
Jump in for a second.
All right. What? Israel? Judaism is not the same as Christianity.
If I can.
Yeah, go ahead, Israel. Go ahead. You're the expert here. You're a religious guy.
Okay, so we find Satan in Genesis. He's the adversary, so he gives you free will. And if you look carefully in Genesis 2, I think 16, it says God told him, eat from all the fruit of the trees. Right? So the first thing God tells him is eat from all the fruit of the trees. And then the second thing is if you eat from this tree, on the day you will eat from this tree, you will die. So it's all about the tone of voice, how you read it, and it's and who said dying is necessarily bad. And according to our traditions, so Adam's role in the world was to. The Garden of Eden is a different dimension. It's not our physical world. So he realizes that God had to give him free will to choose to die, to go to the lower world where his job was to fix. So he didn't even realize that. So Eve realizes it and tells him, dude, this is not where we need to be. You can't die here. We need to go lower. And God tells him, on the day you will eat. So it's a commandment, and that's according to us also. It's not a sin. The first sin is Cain killing Abel, and not the eating of the fruit. It's actually a commandment. But Satan is the
adversary of man.
Yeah. Okay. So I gotta put my kids to sleep, and good night.
Well, you see, so now when our Bible gets into the hands of non-Jews in the first and second century, and the Septuagint that you have is not the original Septuagint. You could do the research on that. It's a Christian retake or do-over of the original 70 scribes that Alexander the Great commissioned to write the Septuagint. The original Septuagint no longer exists. But when our scriptures got into the hands of Greeks and Romans, you get a different take on Satan, where Satan becomes like a pagan god in opposition to the Creator, a fallen angel. All right? That's not our position on Satan.
Well, Satan is still subject to what God says. He can only do what God allows him to do.
Can I respond to you when I get a chance?
Yeah,
I'll just real quick say that pagan gods are actually more satanized humans, because the archetypal concept of a evil manipulator of a being is nothing that Christians invented. But the fact that, I mean, I see where you're coming from on that view, but I think it's kind of the other way around. Because I think if the idea of a Satan originally existed in general, then all paganism and all of their gods are going to be influenced by Satan in order to make humans.
Yeah, it's called
kind of godized or divine humans, which is a
right.
lie. So they're humans.
These are the forces of impurity are in the hands of the adversary. It's a spiritual force. All right, it's the desire to want to commit evil and be wicked and do wrong. All right, this has been a part of the human experience since consciousness or
do you
human.
believe in angels and that sort of thing? beings
Of course, yes, of course. This is a major part of Judaism.
Yeah, because I think most of us here do not think that Satan is the opposite of God. That is definitely
No, but Christianity has been for the longest time a sort of quasi-pagan from its beginnings, from its origins.
It's definitely always had its false teachings, as has Judaism, and throughout the entire Bible we can see that as well. I mean, everything's, but there's always been a remnant. There's always been truth that's taught there.
Amen.
Is they say that even Judaism was they say Zoroastrian came in, and that's where the Satan idea came in with the yin and the yang of the good and the bad or whatever. But
it sounds like you're talking more of dualism, where there's a good God and an evil God. But that's absolutely
dualism.
That have that false idea.
Dualism, yeah.
Tell them to their face that they're wrong.
To be fair, Catholicism,
God is sovereign. That's something that a lot of Christians like to say, that have that true idea that there's nothing that's outside of his control. Just as we can see in Job, whoever you might think that the Satan spoken of in Job, who's asking God permission to do these things, it's clear that indicates that there's nothing that God does not allow. So
exactly.
I think you're kind of misconstruing. No, I agree. There are Christians that have these views. I've seen them, and they make me sick. But we don't hold those views.
Good for you. Well, that's an improvement over the past, because that's the way Christianity has been practiced. Is that there's
those Jews that think that Israel is not the Israel that exists today, is not the one that's there by God and that's there by man. Those are detractors. The Christians you're describing are also the detractors, is what I'm saying.
Those people, those ultra-Orthodox sects that you find in New York that are pro-Palestinian, they took such offense to the fact that Israel was founded by secular agnostics or atheists or non-believers that were more politically bent towards leftism and communism and socialism, and what they did to them, how they persecuted them. These secular non-religious Zionists treated the religious very, very badly. They treated them like garbage. All right, so
let's just demystify the whole Satan thing and say that a whole bunch of people together have a spirit of evil, and that's what I think people misconstrue, and they call it like Illuminati, secret societies, or I would call it demonic influence from Satan. But either way, the end result is the same thing, which is evil things that are against God.
Hey, really quickly to break in, guys. We have just crossed over the 2-hour mark about 11 minutes ago, so I do want to start the wind down of here. Just because I've now been with the 3-hour debate there, I've been streaming for about 5 hours straight now. I want to go ahead and.
All right, I'm glad I had a chance to participate and give you my opinions about the Exodus.
Please come back.
All right.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a great conversation. I don't know if you subbed, but if you did, thank you. And if not, you're still welcome back anyway.
I did.
You guys should set up a debate.
I appreciate that.
About scripture and stuff.
No, Israel was actually very helpful. He's I'm assuming an American Jew living in Israel here, so, and he's got a bit more knowledge about to the point where he's really absorbed the biblical quotes and the references. I'm more of an avid. I'm a big Rabbi Tovia Singer fan. I'm a big Joseph Atwell fan, if you know who that is. But yeah, I'm glad to discuss these issues with you guys, because I think it's very important. We're in a period of time, not just because of what you said, CJ, about technology and the commentary you gave, because the Earth itself is showing signs that we're on the verge of something big happening soon, and everybody knows what I'm talking about.
I guess using a computer is okay on the Sabbath, I guess.
No, the Sabbath is exited a long time, like a few hours, more than a few, before the Jericho.
Time zone than me.
I'm in Israel. It's 12 midnight over here.
Okay, right. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Oh wow, yeah. I guess it is pretty late for you then, huh? I totally. It's funny that was completely lost on me as well. That you were obviously in a different time zone, right?
Right.
But so yeah. with that, I want to go ahead and give everybody a chance to say some final words, and then we're going to go ahead and shut this down. So let's start with, we'll go Kevin, Jamie, Kelvy, Sam, and then I'll go ahead and end there. Go right ahead, guys.
Okay, yeah, it's always great discussions on here, CJ. I wish I could have came in earlier. But yeah, my closing statements will be this. 2,000 years ago, God became a man, lived a perfect, sinless life, perfectly upheld the law of Moses, died on the cross for our sins as the perfect sacrifice, the perfect Lamb of God, and rose again the third day. And anyone that believes on this has eternal life. And I just encourage everyone to trust the Messiah. Thanks, CJ. See you next time, brother.
Absolutely, and thank you. And God bless you as well. And Brother Jamie, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd love to talk to Sam some other time, but a very interesting conversation. I'm still need to go back, and I didn't get to see the whole debate. But I wanted to push back on the interpretation of Genesis just briefly and respectfully. I think there is no one Jewish interpretation, quote unquote, right? Just like there's not one Christian interpretation. And so I'd like to find out more about exactly where the interpretation is interesting. I would just say, I think that when they ate from the tree, you could argue that the moral principles of God that you could say are codified in the Ten Commandments, almost all of them are explicitly broken or implicitly broken by eating of the fruit and disobeying God. So that's the way I would tend to want to look at that. And so, anyways, yeah, that was fun and very interesting and very informative. Thanks. And I hope Sam comes back. Have a good one.
Bye. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, I'm going to have to go back and check out the debate. But yeah, keeping it on the subject, I was going to say that, yeah, just keep in mind that God obviously knew all of the misconceptions that human beings were going to have. And it's that way for a reason. And if he's intended for people to be wiped out without a trace, or there to be a mystery behind them, there's also would be a reason for that. Also, the notion of what a myth actually is, and what it isn't. Myth isn't necessarily a fable, which everybody agrees is a made-up story. A myth can contain truth more than actual history can. History is often lies, where about a myth is something that is kind of derived. Therefore, I think truth can be derived from it. I think all creation is from God and from God's command. God's command is his word, who we know is Jesus. And all life is by his breath. And from that, we have a way of knowing things, and we have a way of experiencing truth through him and through the knowledge of him and through our faith in him. And anything that we can do to get us closer to him, because the meaning of a thing is the spirit of a thing. So if we're looking at a story like the Exodus, and we're wondering, is this true? Is this true? Well, what do we get from it? If we get truth from it, then we get spirit from it. And in my view, as a Trinitarian, the spirit of God is God himself. And so whether or not the words we're reading is a factual history and we can prove it or not through evidence and through archaeology, etc., that doesn't really fall into whether we have the spirit or not. And having the spirit is through our faith and through our belief in him who spoke himself into creation, through his breath and through his word. Amen. And yeah. And Sam, great to have you. I think you could bring a lot of education to some of these folks and to myself. And I hope you come back. And thank you. And have a great one.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Nice talking to you. Nice meeting you. Anyway, so yeah, my final closing statements are that what I was getting at, I'll extrapolate a little bit more on it. I personally believe that we're on the verge of messianic revelation, as it was prophesied by the Hebrew prophets. All the signs are there. both with all the conflicts raging amongst nations, within nations, economic intrigues. We're on the verge of a global economic crisis. Everybody knows it. It's not a secret. We're on the verge of mass bedlam and chaos worldwide. This was prophesied in the Hebrew prophets. It is the harbinger for the arrival of the Hebrew Jewish Messiah, as was prophesied in the prophets. I do not believe that it is Jesus from the Jewish perspective, but I have no problem discussing the matter with Christians. We're halfway on the same page, but this one issue that gets between Jews and Christians will be out of the way soon. It will be resolved. It will no longer be a stumbling block. It will no longer be an obstacle. The Christians have their version of the Jewish Messiah as being the Antichrist. I'm not insulted by that. I used to be. I understand why that was done. I don't agree with it. We'll soon have the answers to all our questions. My personal take on it is that the Jewish Messiah is already here at Israel. So, and the revelation of this Messiah is going to be in our lifetimes, and I don't think it'll take that much longer. I'm following all the developments from around the world. What's about to happen is written of in the Ezekiel, when people will throw their gold and silver into the streets, and there will be no solution to the enormous trouble that is coming our way. This is a time of Jacob's troubles, and it's in the book of Daniel as well, a time of distress like no other, that no nation has ever seen. And that's why I was implying, and not implying, like nudging CJ here and the others to say, well, this is a very peculiar time, not just technology wise, and not just information and opportunities and all this. There are a lot of things that are happening. I would pay attention to nature lashing out. Those are very obvious and clear signs. And the fact that we're on the verge, on the edge of nuclear war on multi fronts in both the Ukraine and China, Taiwan, us versus the Iranians. Threats of cyber attacks from the World Economic Forum, Mr. Klaus Schwab, if you know who that is. And we've got a lot of issues. These are very pressing sort of like indications that we're on the edge of a major event. All right? We have our takes on it. We disagree, but we know we're on the verge of something big happening soon. And I believe it's going to be a messianic revelation. We'll all know soon enough. That's my final statement. There you go.
All right, thank you. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and give my final statements here. So thank you all for being here, and shalom to you all. If you like this video, please remember to like and share this video. Please consider subscribing to the channel if you have not done so, if you do enjoy this content, and hit that bell to get notified every time that we go live. I am trying to make this into a full-time career of apologetics and study. If you guys think that I am deserving of that, you can help make that a thing by contributing financially, either through one-time donations to the PayPal or a subscription to the Patreon. Please only do so if you feel that I deserve it. I definitely don't want people to just give because they like me or something like that, right? Certainly give on the basis of the work done. We don't want to take these things lightly, right? We want to make sure that people are actually being given good information. And of course, don't do so if it's going to negatively impact you as well. I'll say finally that I absolutely loved this debate. I know that obviously some of the conclusions I reached about the debate are, painted by my own bias, but I still obviously think they're true, right? It was a great conversation, wonderful conversation. I thank very much Drs. Maggie Bryson and Josh Bowen for having the conversation with me, Jonathan Sheffield for reaching out to me, Derek from Myth Vision for hosting the debate. It was all very, very good, and I can't wait to do it sometime again. I want to just go ahead and remind you guys that I believe we are living in biblical times. I believe that the second coming of our Messiah, Jesus Christ, is upon us. Of course, very different interpretations as far as what exactly is happening. But I think what we are seeing and what the religious Jews are seeing is we can all feel something is happening. We can tell it's happening. We can see in the scriptures that it's something that was seen to happen in the future. And now we are living in that time. So be in prayer. Be serving Yehovah, the God of Israel, the God of the Old Testament, the God of the Torah, Yeshua HaMashiach, who came down in the flesh as God incarnate. And with that being said, friends, if the Lord wills and tarries, we will see you here soon.